pregnant woman walks into a crowded US airport alone, claiming she's flying to visit her husband. But what's hidden in her coat could shake the core of the military-industrial system. This isn't a spy movie, it's a story rooted in quiet courage, split-second instincts, and the gray space between guilt and justice. What if the hero was someone no one believed? If stories like this intrigue you, hit like, subscribe for more gripping, true-to-life narratives. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what would you have done in her place? The air in Terminal C at Denver International was thick with the scent of coffee, stress, and the faint metallic tang that always seemed to hang around security checkpoints. Derek Monroe stood tall near the boarding gates, his eyes scanning the crowd with the casual intensity of someone who'd done this job for far too long. Beside him, Scout, his golden retriever partner, padded quietly, his nose occasionally twitching. It was a slow Tuesday, the kind Derek almost liked. Nothing worse than a Friday swarm of business travelers trying to beat weekend rushes, or the Sunday night chaos of families juggling juice boxes and boarding passes. Today was just slow enough to give his instincts room to stretch, to notice the things other people didn't. Scout veered slightly, his leash tugging gently in Derek's hand. "Got something?" Derek muttered. Scout didn't respond like usual, not with a sudden pull or bark, but with a strange pause. His nose hovered just above the floor, leading him to a row of padded airport chairs where a woman sat, slightly hunched, both hands resting on her belly. Pregnant, third trimester by the look of it. Derek squinted, automatically checking for anything off. No luggage other than a small tote, no phone in hand, no drinks or snacks. Her boarding pass folded neatly in her lap. Scout stopped 2 feet from her and, without another sound, lowered himself slowly into a down position. Then came the sound Derek didn't hear often, a soft, sustained whine. It was almost imperceptible, the kind of sound only handlers recognized. Scout wasn't alerting to explosives. He wasn't tracking for drugs. This was his quiet signal, a behavior Derek had trained into him when they began working special intelligence assignments the year before. It meant, something's not right, but I can't explain it with my nose alone. The woman looked up. Her face was calm, too calm, her eyes pale blue, clear and undisturbed. She offered a soft smile, almost wistful. Then she said it. "He still remembers." The words were barely above a whisper, but they froze Derek like a slap. He stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to come with me for a brief screening. This won't take long." She nodded without protest, stood with the kind of deliberate care only someone late in pregnancy would manage, and smoothed her loose cardigan over her belly. Scout remained low, growling very faintly under his breath, his eyes still locked on her. "Do you have any checked luggage?" Derek asked. "Just me," she said softly, then added, "And him?" It was only then that Derek realized what was bothering him. Most people, even those who were innocent, reacted in predictable ways when approached by canine officers. Nervous laughter, questions, annoyance, but not her. She was as if the leash, the badge, and the uniform were no surprise. As if she expected it. They moved toward the secondary screening area just off the gate corridor, a space more private but still within the general security perimeter. "What's your name, ma'am?" Derek asked. "Claire," she replied. "Claire Donovan." "Destination?" she said. "I'm meeting my husband there. He works with an NGO." "Any reason Scout might be reacting to you? Do you work with chemicals around animals, anything like that?" "Year since I left my job," she said. "Which was?" "I used to be in financial analytics. I'm on medical leave now for obvious reasons." She gave a light nod toward her abdomen. Derek took in the way she stood, heels just slightly apart, one hand steady on a bench as she shifted her weight. She wasn't faking the pregnancy. That much was clear. Her file, which he accessed quickly via TSA interface, matched what she'd told him. Claire Donovan, U.S. citizen, 35, no criminal record, no travel alerts, no past secondary screenings flagged, just completely ordinary. Too ordinary. Scout, meanwhile, was pacing gently near the bench, circling once, then twice, nose hovering especially near the hem of her coat. Derek crouched. "Scout, sit." The dog obeyed, but his body language stayed tense. Not aggressive, but alert. Highly alert. Claire looked at him for a long moment, then said, "He really does remember me, doesn't he?" Derek's mind flipped through mental files. Had she ever interacted with Scout before? Was she in a prior case, a training session, a witness? The dog had been with him for 4 years, but rarely reacted this sensitively unless there was emotional context, fear, trauma, or familiarity. "Where would he know you from?" he asked. Claire just smiled faintly, as if it hurt a little to answer. "Not from where I'm going, from where I used to be." And then she sat back down, folding her hands again over her stomach, waiting quietly as Derek called in his supervisor. The tension in the room thickened like a fog settling in. Claire Donovan had passed every test so far, but Scout wasn't wrong, and Derek Monroe had learned the hard way, when the dog doubts, you don't dismiss, you dig. Because behind quiet signals often lie the loudest truths. The small private screening room just off gate C21 hummed with the low murmur of the ventilation system and the occasional crackle of the TSA radio. Claire sat quietly, legs crossed at the ankle, hands resting lightly on her stomach. She had placed her beige coat on the adjacent bench without ceremony, the fabric pooling into a soft heap, nondescript and slightly worn. Derek Monroe stood opposite her, arms folded, watching not just Claire but Scout, who was no longer pacing but instead stationed himself 2 feet from the coat, ears forward, eyes locked, muscles taut beneath his golden fur. "I appreciate your cooperation, Ms. Donovan," Derek began, glancing at the monitor to his right, which now displayed a real-time digital copy of her documents. "Your boarding pass checks out. Flight 5749 to Washington, D.C. Gate, C21. You're listed in seat 14A. No checked baggage. And according to the system, your husband is expecting you at Dulles International." Claire nodded. "Yes. We're staying in Arlington. He works with a nonprofit focused on post-incarceration reintegration. Name? Thomas Donovan. He's a program coordinator at Elevate Pathways. You can call them, he's on the site." She spoke calmly, her tone neutral. If she was nervous, it didn't show in her voice or posture. But Scout remained rooted, his gaze unwavering, a low huff passing through his nose every few seconds. Derek had seen dogs react to explosives, to drugs, even to emotional distress. But this was different. This was fixation, controlled but intense. And it wasn't aimed at Claire directly. It was centered on that coat. "Do you mind if I ask why you're traveling without luggage?" Derek asked, not looking at her but at the pile of beige fabric beside her. Claire didn't hesitate. "I shipped most of my belongings ahead. I've been working remotely from Colorado since March. My husband secured housing last week, and we agreed it was safer for me to fly without excess. I'm 7 months pregnant. I'm not exactly in the mood to lift suitcases." She offered a smile that might have passed for warmth if it weren't so measured. "That coat looks warm," Derek said casually. "Thrift store find," she replied. "Layering helps on the plane, cabin air always makes me cold." Her answers were clean, unforced, believable. But Derek's years of fieldwork had taught him that believability meant very little without context. He turned toward Scout and gave the hand signal to disengage. The dog didn't budge. Instead, he let out a soft, drawn-out growl that was almost imperceptible unless you knew what to listen for. Derek lowered his voice. "My partner here is trained to alert us to a wide range of threats, both physical and behavioral. He's not indicating contraband in the traditional sense, but his posture is telling me there's something we need to understand better before we can clear you to board." Claire tilted her head. "You think I'm a threat? I think you're unusual," Derek said. "And unusual gets extra attention in a post-9/11 airport, especially when it involves federal travel lanes and one of the most experienced dogs on the force acting out of protocol." Her fingers flexed slightly against her stomach, then relaxed. "You've been followed before, Agent Monroe. I'm used to being watched. I worked in high finance for 9 years, including for contractors with Department of Defense ties. Maybe that's what your dog smells, stress, old perfume, bad memories." Derek noted the way she framed her experience. High finance, not government. Stress, not substance. Still, her file hadn't mentioned any past clearances or security flags. And her employment history, at least the public parts, were clean. But Scout didn't care about paper trails. Scout responded to presence, to truth as it leaked through skin and breath. And Scout still wouldn't look away from that damn coat. I'm going to ask you to allow a manual inspection of your belongings, Derek said. That includes the coat. Is that necessary? Claire asked, still measured. You've already scanned my ID and boarding pass. I'm a 35-year-old pregnant woman flying to meet my husband. I'm not exactly a high-risk profile. Derek met her eyes evenly. Exactly. And that's why we check, because someone looking like you is the perfect profile if they want to be overlooked. For a moment, something flickered across Claire's face. Recognition, perhaps. Or a kind of weary resolve. Fine, she said, and leaned over to lift the coat with both hands, setting it gently on the table. Derek nodded, motioned to a nearby officer, and began slipping on gloves. He didn't rush. The outer fabric was standard cotton poly blend, nothing heavy-duty. But as he turned it over, he noticed something odd. The inner side felt not bulky exactly, but layered, reinforced. You wear this often? He asked. Almost daily, Claire replied. He stretches with the bump. He pressed a hand to the lining. It's heat-insulated, he murmured. Unusual for April. Claire didn't answer. Derek slid his hand beneath the inner seam, feeling for zippers, buttons, pouches. There weren't any. Just a faint stiffness near the spine, no hard object, but a sense of embedded resistance. Like a pouch stitched too flat to see. Scout gave another short breath and sat, his eyes flicking from Derek's hand back to Claire's face. Derek looked at her again. What were you doing before you moved to remote work? Portfolio audit lead, she said. I reviewed private equity movements for clients. Mostly mid-level contractors. Names? You'll find them in my LinkedIn. Or in the old SEC disclosures. I might, Derek said, but I'm more interested in why a suspiciously insulated coat, no luggage, and a dog who hasn't taken his eyes off you for 15 minutes. Claire's smile returned, but it was smaller this time. Maybe I'm just unlucky. Derek didn't smile back. He tapped his comm once and said quietly, Need a secondary screening team, room B. Have the X-ray unit ready. Claire turned her head slightly toward the window that overlooked the tarmac, watching a 737 taxi past. She looked more tired than frightened. I'm not the one you should be watching, you know, she said. Derek narrowed his eyes. Then who should I be watching? Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. She simply leaned back again, placing both hands protectively over her stomach. And in that stillness, Scout stood. Not barked, not growled, just stood, poised and steady, his head turned toward the coat, his body saying what his voice could not. Derek stood silently as the secondary screening team entered the room, one technician wheeling in a portable X-ray scanner, while another prepared to photograph and catalog the contents of Claire's coat. Claire remained seated, her hands never leaving her stomach, her face unreadable. Scout sat at Derek's heel, now completely still, ears alert and eyes fixed. It was a posture Derek had learned to respect deeply. Scout wasn't just watching, he was remembering. Something about Claire's presence, her voice, even her scent, had triggered a memory in the dog far deeper than ordinary alertness. As the X-ray unit began to hum, hands scanned the interior layers of the coat. Derek stepped back, tugging gently on Scout's lead to bring him into a quiet corner of the room. He crouched beside him, running a hand along the dog's flank, grounding himself more than anything. You is it, boy? He whispered, more to himself than expecting a reply. What are you trying to tell me? Scout blinked slowly, then turned his head slightly, not toward Claire this time, but toward the far wall. Derek followed the movement, his eyes narrowing. That wall held a small bulletin board, routine TSA updates, a few procedural notices, and in the corner, a faded flyer from a joint military-civilian training program dated nearly 4 years ago. His thoughts jumped, fast and sharp. Scout had spent 2 years in training before being certified as a full-duty K-9. One of his longest rotations had been at Fort Rockwell, a base outside El Paso with a hybrid program for integrating civilian contractors and military police operations. Claire had said she used to work in high finance. Then she'd added, almost offhandedly, that she'd worked with government contractors. Derek stood quickly, stepping out into the hallway. He pulled out his phone, navigated through secure channels, and accessed the Department of Defense database available to federal-level TSA officers. In the personnel search, he entered Claire Donovan, adding keywords, Fort Rockwell Civilian Advisor and Contract Finance. The screen loaded slowly, then populated with a file tagged Archived Restricted Access. Derek entered his override credentials. A summary flashed open. Claire Donovan, civilian contractor, retained by Lockridge Solutions under subcontract to Department of Defense, signed to Fort Rockwell from June 2020 through February 2021. Role: financial analyst with clearance to access mid-level procurement documents, security clearance level 2. Final status: role terminated voluntarily. Security pass deactivated. Non-renewal requested. There was a secondary note beneath that: subject served as cooperating civilian witness in internal audit investigation. Case Red Slate. Derek felt a chill run down his spine. He knew Red Slate by reputation. It had been one of those investigations whispered about over beers between federal agents. Allegations of massive overbilling, kickbacks between defense contractors and base procurement officers, and classified equipment being billed for and never delivered. The kind of scandal that could rock military contracting circles but had quietly died out before reaching court. He clicked the case number and read the last available entry: investigation suspended pending additional testimony. Key witness recanted under legal pressure. Evidence inconclusive. No charges filed. The witness had been Claire Donovan. She hadn't just worked at Fort Rockwell, she had tried to expose it. Derek's thoughts raced. If Claire had been a whistleblower and Scout had trained during the same time frame, it was possible their paths had crossed. Not formally, Scout wouldn't remember people by name, but by presence, by emotional weight. Dogs like Scout didn't just imprint on smells. They reacted to adrenaline, stress hormones, fear, and patterns of behavior. If Claire had been under threat while Scout was training, he might have logged her into his internal compass, not as threat, but as tension, a signal, a wound. Derek returned to the room, face neutral. "Ms. Donovan," he said quietly, "were you ever stationed at Fort Rockwell?" Claire didn't look surprised. "You found the file. You didn't mention it." "I figured you would, eventually." Derek crossed his arms. "You were a witness in Red Slate," she nodded. "And it went nowhere. You recanted." "I didn't recant," she said, her voice sharpening for the first time. "I refused to testify without protective custody. They wouldn't grant it. I got followed. My email was hacked. I was 6 months into a contract that turned into a nightmare." She took a breath, then added, "I left before I got crushed, and I've been trying to stay off everyone's radar since." The X-ray technician interrupted. "Agent Monroe, you should see this." Derek turned toward the monitor. The image of the coat showed several padded panels, all filled with what looked like thermal gel inserts, common for keeping the wearer warm, uncommon in this density. But embedded inside 2 of those panels were thin, rectangular objects, flat, no obvious wiring but clearly separate from the coat structure. "Explosives," the tech said. "But definitely electronics, possibly encrypted drives or data cards." Claire closed her eyes briefly. "They're not weapons," she said. "They're documents. Classified. Not anymore, but dangerous still." Bailiff felt the pressure shift in the room. "You're smuggling evidence?" "No," she said. "I'm delivering it, quiet, before someone finds me again." Derek looked at her. "Why now?" "Because I'm running out of time, and I needed someone who wouldn't dismiss the first red flag." Her eyes flicked toward Scout's. "Your partner remembered what I couldn't say out loud." Derek felt his jaw tighten. There were protocols. He was a TSA officer, not an intelligence handler. But the instincts drilled into him through years of training whispered one truth louder than the rest. Whatever she was carrying, whatever story she had buried under layers of silence and caution, it had made Scout break protocol. And that didn't happen unless something was very, very real. The hum of the X-ray machine slowed as the technician toggled through contrast levels, adjusting brightness until the monitor revealed the finer details buried deep within Claire's coat. Derek leaned in, eyes scanning the irregular shadows now clearer along the inner seam of the lapel. There, just beneath the surface of the fabric, was a uniform sheet of material running the length of both lapels, stitched flat into the lining, too thin to be bulletproof, too smooth to be padding. The technician said, tapping the screen with a capped pen, "Is metal. Layered, laminated. Probably aluminum or a copper composite. Not wired, not dangerous by itself, but intentional. It's not just part of the coat's design." Derek turned back to Claire. "You want to explain why your lapels are lined with conductive metal?" Claire's eyes flicked to the screen, then returned to Derek. It's called signal shielding, she said matter-of-fact. I had it added last year. Some women carry shielding blankets when they're pregnant. I didn't want to wrap my belly in tinfoil, so I modified my coat to block. Derek had seen those ads himself. Blankets, maternity wear, even baby bassinets, sold with claims of electromagnetic protection. But something about this implementation didn't sit right. The symmetry, the way the layer ran not across her abdomen but up near her collar and into the coat's shoulders. The technician frowned. It's not shielding her belly, he muttered. It's blocking outward data signatures. From the chest, Derek nodded slowly. Scan the lapels for embedded storage. The tech adjusted the scanner. A second pass ran, this time with NFC and RFID filters engaged. Within seconds, two faint outlines emerged, one tucked into each side of the inner lapels, buried inside the metallic lining. Rectangles smaller than credit cards, flat and uniform. Got something, the tech confirmed. No readable signal, these are wrapped tight. Could be Faraday pouches or foil laminated wrap meant to mask proximity signatures. You'd need to cut the lining open to pull them out safely. Claire remained silent. Derek turned to her, quieter this time. You said you were delivering documents, not data. She didn't flinch. They're the same thing these days. Paper leaves a trail. Flash memory can move through checkpoints undetected. That's why this coat was designed the way it is. Not why didn't you declare any eye of it. That line hit heavier than she intended, and for a moment, the room felt 10 degrees colder. Derek had heard variations of this justification before, by whistleblowers, by analysts, by people who knew too much and trusted too few. The problem was, motivations didn't excuse method, and right now Claire was one step away from federal charges. You understand how this looks? He asked carefully. To security, to intel, yes, she said, but I also know the people who don't want this information to surface have more access than I ever did. If I go through official channels, it disappears again, like it did last time. Derek's mind reeled through protocol. Transporting concealed digital storage through a federal airport checkpoint without declaration wasn't just a policy violation. It was a crime. But it was also the kind of crime that whistleblower statutes had been built around. If she was telling the truth. I'm going to need to log this discovery, he said. And I'm going to need to open the coat's lining. Claire nodded. Just be careful. They're sensitive dryers, and they're all I have left. The tech retrieved a micro scalpel from the kit, slicing carefully along the inner seam with surgical precision. The room fell utterly quiet. Scout shifted slightly, eyes now moving between the technician's hands and Claire's face. He wasn't growling anymore, but he wasn't relaxed either. The technician paused after slicing open the left lapel. Inside, folded tightly in a layer of conductive foil and fine carbon mesh, was a single card. Black, no logo, matte surface, standard micro SSD dimensions. He lifted it gently with tweezers, placed it into an evidence tray lined with static of foam, and repeated the process on the right. An identical card emerged. Derek stepped forward. Can you access the metadata? Not without a reader, the tech said, but I can tell you one thing. These weren't built for everyday use. They're heat-sealed, probably password-locked, and the outer material suggests custom manufacturing. Whoever made these didn't want anyone tracking them by signal or proximity. Claire finally spoke again. They contain source scans, wire transfers, backhandle communications between Lockridge executives and third-party procurement officers. Stuff that was buried deep. Some of it implicates active staff. I downloaded what I could before I lost access. When was that? 2 months ago. Someone flagged my IP. My cloud backups were wiped within hours, so I went analog. Commissioned through a privacy boutique in Portland. They didn't ask questions. Derek exhaled slowly. Every answer she gave brought more questions, but none of them contradicted, and none of them explained why Scout had recognized her before the data, before the coat, before any hint of illegality. That recognition had come from memory, not suspicion. Scout had seen her under threat before, and Derek had a gut feeling he was seeing it again now. He motioned toward the technician. We're going to secure these drives. You log them. I'll contact Joint Intel. Claire shifted in her chair. They won't help, she said. They'll stall they'll classify and I'll lose everything again. Derek turned to her. Then tell me who you were really meeting in DC, because I don't believe you were just going to see your husband. Derek stood in the security office, eyes fixed on the surveillance monitor displaying footage from earlier that morning. The timestamp read 5:12 a.m. The camera captured a woman resembling Claire entering the women's restroom near gate C21. She wore a dark hoodie, jeans, and carried a large tote bag. 15 minutes later, at 5:27 a.m., the same camera showed a woman exiting the restroom. This time, she had shoulder-length auburn hair, a beige maternity dress, and no tote bag in sight. The transformation was subtle yet significant. Derek's brow furrowed as he replayed the footage, noting the precise timing and the deliberate change in appearance. He turned to the facial recognition specialist beside him. Run a facial recognition scan on both entries, he instructed, Derek's heart pounding. This wasn't just a case of a woman changing clothes. It was a deliberate identity swap. He recalled Claire's earlier statements about being followed and her need for discretion. But this level of deception suggested a deeper, more complex motive. He reviewed the security footage from the boarding gate. At 6:00 a.m., Emily Harper approached the gate agent, presented her boarding pass, and proceeded through. Her demeanor was calm, unremarkable. At 6:05 a.m., Claire Donovan, now in her transformed appearance, approached the same gate, presented a different boarding pass, and was allowed through without issue. Derek's mind raced. 2 women, similar in build and features, had entered the restroom, and only one had emerged as Claire. He needed to find Emily Harper. A quick check of the flight manifest showed that Emily's flight to Chicago had departed on time and she was listed as having boarded. But with the identity swap, who had actually boarded that flight? He contacted the Chicago TSA office, requesting a verification of Emily Harper's arrival. An hour later, they confirmed that the passenger who arrived did not match Emily's photo ID. The woman was detained for questioning. She claimed to be Claire Donovan, stating that she had been coerced into swapping identities at the Denver airport. Derek felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Claire had orchestrated an identity swap to evade detection, using another woman as a decoy. The implications were vast, suggesting a network or at least a well-thought-out plan. He needed to confront Claire and get to the bottom of this. Derek sat in the operations room, eyes flickering between screens as the digital forensics team pulled every possible data point tied to Claire Donovan's travel records. They had already debunked the myth of the DC trip, and now the focus shifted to her actual destination. We ran the QR code from the boarding pass she used, said Jalen, a young but sharp analyst with a background in counterintelligence. He doesn't match any Washington, D.C. manifest. She was never booked on a flight to Reagan or Dulles. So where was she headed? Derek asked, tension rising. Jalen tapped a few keys, bringing up the confirmed itinerary. Flight 2476, destination Fort Fielder Regional Airport. It's a small civilian airfield 2 hours south of the Canadian border, near Idaho. Derek leaned forward. That's nowhere near DC. Who flies to Fort Fielder unless they want to disappear? Exactly, Jalen replied. There's no federal office there, no organizational presence. Just hiking lodges, a decommissioned ranger station, and a few towns that haven't seen a Starbucks in a decade. Any aliases attached to the booking? None. It was purchased under Claire Donovan's name, but it was paid in cash at a kiosk in Spokane. 4 days ago, no luggage declared, no seat selection. Classic low-profile move. Derek's mind was already assembling the implications. Claire had clearly staged the DC narrative for their benefit. Something credible enough to buy her time, but not so close it could be easily verified on the spot. A classic misdirection. And the decoy, Emily Harper, wasn't a random stranger after all. Another analyst chimed in from across the room. We dug into Emily Harper's employment records. She's an executive assistant to the regional director of Quantigen Capital. Derek froze. Quantigen? The private equity firm with those defense logistics contracts? That's the one. They've had multiple deals with Department of Energy and Homeland Security. Most of it's been clean. Derek's pulse quickened. So Claire swaps identities with someone who has low-level access to sensitive government finance. Why? To piggyback a trail? Or plant one? Jalen adjusted the screen again, now displaying Harper's email metadata and recent calendar logs. We pulled logs from Harper's work email, She was scheduled to hand-deliver encrypted USBs to a secure Dropbox in Chicago. Routine courier task. Done quarterly. And the woman who boarded the Chicago flight in her name, Claire, could have taken those drives with her, Derek said, or swapped them, planted duplicates. Who's to say what was in that delivery by the time it reached its destination? That's the thing, Jalen said, eyes narrowing. Security at Quantigen confirmed something odd about the drop-off. The envelope contained 2 USB drives, but they weren't the standard hardware they usually send. These had no logos, were heavier, and one had a different encryption structure. So Claire not only diverted attention from herself by using Harper's identity, she potentially inserted false or modified data into a federal financial network. Possibly, we'll need time to break the encryption, but the implications, I know, Derek interrupted. You're huge. The pieces kept falling into place, each one dragging the scope wider. Claire's actual flight path was designed not to escape scrutiny, but to redirect it. She wasn't running away from anything. She was running toward something. Something hidden at Fort Fielder. Pull any surveillance footage from that airport in the last 48 hours, Derek ordered. Look for anyone matching Claire's modified appearance. Check rental car records, local transport logs. I want every inch of that town covered. And Harper, Jalen asked. Still being held in Chicago, she insists she was approached in the restroom, told it was some kind of emergency, that Claire flashed credentials, said she was working undercover. Did she believe her now? Enough to cooperate, enough to board the wrong plane under the wrong name? Fear makes people do strange things, Derek muttered, especially when wrapped in authority. He turned back to the original manifest from Claire's false flight to D.C. Were there any other anomalies? Anyone else using misdirected tickets or alternate IDs? That we can tell yet, said Jalen. But Harper's data trail is thin. We found one encrypted call between her and a blocked number out of Fairfax, Virginia. Happened 3 days before the flight. Derek looked up. Fairfax. That's Quantigen's East Coast office, exactly. Claire's network might go deeper than we thought. This isn't just about leaking documents. It's not even about Childers herself. She's moving data, exploiting institutional gaps, and using people like Harper as temporary assets, willing or not. So what now? Now, Derek said, standing up. We chase her north. He looked at the still frame of Claire exiting the Denver restroom in her beige maternity dress, calm as if nothing was amiss. But the footage now felt like a ghost trail, a carefully constructed illusion to mislead anyone watching. Claire Donovan wasn't running scared. She was orchestrating something precise, something that hadn't yet fully revealed its purpose. Not even close. The interrogation room at the Denver field office was cold, lit by a single overhead bulb that cast sharp angles across the metal table. Derek stood by the observation glass, arms folded tightly, eyes scanning every twitch of movement as the technician laid out the contents of Claire Donovan's belongings. Her beige maternity coat, still slightly damp from the morning snow, had been dissected with surgical precision. From a thin slit stitched along the inner lining, they had extracted a chip, no bigger than a pinky nail, sealed in a non-conductive foil. It's a micro SD, said the tech Lucas, his gloves snapping as he handed the chip into a static safe envelope. Encrypted. Triple layer, this wasn't just stashed, it was protected like a vault. Derek nodded slowly. Has it been accessed? We cloned it onto a sandbox system, just finished the decryption overlay. And Lucas hesitated. You're going to want to see this yourself. Minutes later, in the operations hub, Derek stood before a monitor showing file directories that screamed of classified implications. There were spreadsheets dated back 2 years, each labeled by quarter, each line itemized with contractor names, line budgets, and internal notes. They're financial records, Derek muttered. More than that, said Jalen, pulling up a set of PDFs. They belong to Galcom Defense Partners. They've held government contracts with the Department of Defense and Energy since 2008. But here, look. These files contain internal expense reports, not just invoices. These are real-time spend records. Derek scrolled through one report, dated just 3 days prior. It's recent. Exactly, Jalen replied. This backup wasn't from the last leak 2 years ago. These are fresh. It's a continuation. Someone inside has been siphoning internal data and updating it consistently. Claire's chip holds the most recent dump. Derek's pulse tightened. Any evidence of manipulation? None. The metadata is clean. Digital signatures match Galcom's internal auditing tools. Whoever compiled this didn't tamper. They extracted. Quiet. A moment passed. Derek's voice lowered. But why? And why risk carrying it physically? Because sending it through any online channel would raise flags, Jalen said. The data tags include executive IDs, payment to shell vendors, subcontractors listed twice under alternate names, classic laundering through layered procurement. This kind of pattern triggers security scans. She couldn't upload it without being noticed. Derek's jaw clenched, so she hid it, on herself, in the lining of a coat, while pretending to be a pregnant woman. The weight of the strategy hit him again. Claire hadn't stumbled into this. She had planned it. Every move from the decoy destination to the identity switch was precise, meant to cloak this chip and get it past airport security. Run a match against past leaks, he said. See if any whistleblowers connect back to Galcom or Claire. Maria joined them, holding a printed sheet. An anonymous FTP drop surfaced on a military transparency site. Classified contracts, supplier discrepancies similar to these. The post was taken down within hours. No source was ever identified, but the metadata from those files matches the format on Claire's chip. So she's the same source, Derek said half to himself. Or working with them. But why resusciting link? Because the last time the leak was dismissed as Galcom denied everything. The media never ran the full story, but this new batch has proof, receipts, internal memos, payment logs. It's undeniable. Derek's thoughts spiraled. Claire had once been within Galcom's orbit, connected peripherally through her civilian consulting. If she had access then, it explained how she knew the system. But why now? What changed 3 days ago that made her run with the chip? The timestamp was too precise to ignore. Track who logged into Galcom's finance system in the 48 hours before the chip's last update, he said. I want every name, internal IPs, VPNs, any possible collaborators. Lucas leaned over. You think she had help? She had access, Derek corrected. That doesn't mean she was alone. Across the room, another agent called out, we've also identified transmission blockers in the lining of the coat. It wasn't just shielding her phone. It was built to suppress all signals around the chip. No RFID, no RFC, no scan tags. Claire didn't just protect the data. She made sure no one could trace it remotely. Derek exhaled. That meant she expected pursuit, anticipated surveillance. She wasn't fleeing blindly. She was delivering something dangerous, to someone who could act. He stared again at the directory, at the names and numbers and silent implications. This wasn't about personal redemption anymore. Claire Donovan had information that could collapse a multi-billion-dollar contractor. She had gone dark not for her own sake, but to make sure the right person saw it. The question now wasn't just where she was, it was who she was trying to find. Derek stared out the window of the surveillance office. The screen behind him looping security footage of Claire's arrival at Denver International. He replayed the moment she stepped off the train from the parking garage, the slight waddle in her gait, the way she cradled her stomach with one hand and carried her bag in the other. It was meticulous rehearse. The pregnancy bump they now knew had been hollowed at the core to accommodate insulation material and signal. But her disguise wasn't just tactical, it was deeply personal. She never tried to sell the data, Maria confirmed, entering with a slim manila folder. There's no trace of contact with whistleblower media, dark web buyers, or even intermediaries. Her travel history, ticket purchases, and burner phones, all local, all limited. No offshore logins, no monetary transfers. She didn't want profit? Derek opened the folder. Inside was a printed profile photo, slightly creased, of an older man with cropped gray hair and a permanent squint. Colonel Frederick Rourke, Maria said. Retired 5 years ago. Former military inspector specializing in fraud investigations. Oversaw internal audits across multiple procurement sectors. And? Derek asked. And Claire Donovan was a cooperating witness in his final investigation, Maria replied, the one that got shut down mid-ad due to lack of admissible evidence. She filed 3 statements about falsified reports inside Galcom's budgeting arm. Rourke backed her, vouched for her credibility, But when the case was buried, she was left out in the cold. They discredited her testimony, severed her consulting contract, and quietly blacklisted her from federal contractor work. Derek turned the photo over. A handwritten address in Bozeman, Montana stared back. "She's taking it to him." "Looks that way," Maria said. "She's not trying to leak it, she's delivering it personally." Derek's mind whirred. Why not mail it? Why not encrypt and send? Maria shook her head. Any transfer attempt through civilian networks would have been intercepted. These files ping half a dozen government watchlist parameters. Qualcomm likely has automated filters across ISP nodes and courier services. The moment metadata resembling their internal structure hits a line, it's flagged and frozen. So she became the courier, Derek said. Herself, using the one disguise, no scanner questions, and expecting mother. Maria added, and she chose a decoy route, booked a flight to DC, but her actual ticket routes her west to Kalispell, Montana, a rural airport 2 hours from Rourke's cabin. Derek rubbed his temple. Does Rourke know she's coming? Unclear. There's no communication between them in the last 3 weeks. No calls, no texts. But 2 days ago, someone left a voicemail on a landline registered to his name. It was scrambled, voice modified, but the background noise matches Claire's apartment. Same refrigerator hum, same streetcar bell in the distance. She warned him, in code. She doesn't want to bring him down with her, Derek muttered. He wants her to see the truth. The truth. It echoed, dense and painful. For years, Claire had lived under a cloud of suspicion, painted as an opportunist who fabricated claims when her consultancy was terminated. Even Derek had once read her name in an internal memo summarizing the failed inquiry as unsubstantiated. But the data on the chip, clean, time-stamped, cross-referenced, proved otherwise. She had seen fraud. She had tried to stop it. And now, years later, she was risking everything to deliver the proof. So she's not a threat, Derek said aloud, eyes still fixed on the screen. She's a witness trying to be heard. Jalen entered with a new update. We just got a location ping. Her burner phone connected briefly at a gas station 20 miles outside Missoula, westbound. Derek grabbed his jacket. Use en route to Rourke. Do we intercept? Jalen asked. Or let her finish it? Derek paused, then turned to Maria. What happens if this data reaches Rourke and he goes public? Qualcomm's entire executive chain gets subpoenaed, Maria answered. And maybe, for once, the truth sticks. Derek clenched his jaw. Claire Donovan had already lost her career, her reputation, her safety. And still she carried forward. Not to exonerate herself, but to put the evidence where it belonged. Not with the press. Not with the highest bidder. But with the one man who believed her when no one else did. The train's momentum slowed as it approached the northern outskirts of Washington, D.C., the gray skies casting a muted tone across the passing neighborhoods. Claire sat near the window, hands folded over her faux pregnancy belly, her mind racing with everything she had risked, everything she still had to protect. Across from her, a mother distracted her toddler with a picture book, the soft hum of the carriage punctuated only by station announcements and the occasional jolt of steel rails. Claire's thoughts were fixed on one destination, an aging commuter stop north of Union Station, rarely patrolled, mostly forgotten, but today holding the single most important meeting of her life. Brett Callahan had once been her only ally, back when the investigation into Qualcomm's spending irregularities had been quietly shelved. He had mentored her through the tangled bureaucracy of contractor audits, taught her how to spot inconsistencies buried under layers of procurement jargon. When the pressure came down from above, when senior officers turned on her and labeled her unreliable, Callahan hadn't wavered. Until the day he was asked to resign without ceremony, his entire record reduced to a line item and a closed file. She hadn't heard from him since, but 3 weeks ago she'd received a single handwritten postcard in her mailbox. No return address, no greeting, just a quote from an old audit manual. The truth leaves a trail if you know where to look. That was all she needed. It wasn't just a message, it was confirmation. He was still out there, still watching, still willing to help. The screen buzzed faintly in her hand as she read over the cloned files one last time. Jalen's earlier analysis was now being independently verified. Each spreadsheet was cross-checked against procurement logs, payroll stubs, and signed digital authorizations. And the numbers spoke volumes. $812,645,000, 0 cents. That was the cumulative sum paid over 4 years to 2 specific defense contractors, Galcon Defense Partners and Argon Tactics Solutions. What linked them wasn't just their services, but shared shell accounts used to funnel duplicate invoices, manipulate labor costs, and bury payments to private entities. The names of 3 senior officers appeared in metadata tags on approval documents: Lieutenant General Marcus Eddings, Brigadier Sarah Kent, and Rear Admiral Hal Morris. Claire's heart hammered as she read the signatures embedded in scanned PDFs. They weren't copies, they were originals, the kind of evidence that could survive courtroom scrutiny. Testimony was fallible, memory could be undermined, but digital timestamps, chain of custody metadata, and layered audit trails, they told stories no one could erase. The train pulled into Brentwood Station just after 1:10 p.m. Claire stood slowly, adjusting her coat, carefully securing the flash drive back into its concealed pocket, the false bump now feeling heavier than ever. She descended to the street level, her eyes scanning the modest crowds. A few cab drivers loitered near the corner, bundled in scarves. A man sold pretzels beside an old Metro kiosk. Then she saw him, Brett Callahan, older now, his frame a bit more bent, his coat a little worn but unmistakably him. His eyes met hers for only a second before he nodded subtly and turned down a side alley. The agreed signal. Claire followed at a cautious distance, her steps measured, deliberate. When she reached him, they didn't hug, they didn't smile, they didn't say hello. "Did you bring it?" he asked. She nodded, pulling the memory chip from the inner lining and placing it in his gloved hand. He looked at it for only a moment, then tucked it into his jacket. "How much do they know?" "Enough to reach you, not yet." He gave a sharp, quiet breath. "I knew they hadn't stopped, just didn't think you'd be the one to finish what we started." "You didn't come to finish it," she replied. "I came to give it to someone who still believed it mattered." Callahan's jaw twitched. "It does. More now than ever. We've been tracking movement, money shifting offshore. This evidence, this changes everything." "And what will you do with it?" she asked. He looked around them once, ensuring the alley remained empty. "You've got one contact left at the Office of Military Ethics. He's clean, retiring next month. If this lands in his hands, we get hearings, we get subpoenas, we get real—" "You think they'll let it go that far?" Claire asked, the fear creeping back. "They might try to stop it, smear you again." "Then they smear me," he said, "but the data will outlive the noise. We just need the first crack in the wall." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Callahan reached into his jacket and handed her a burner phone. "Stay off gate for 72 hours. After that, if no one shows up at your door, you're in the clear. And if someone does, run, fast." She gave him a tight nod, turned and walked out of the alley, her heart thudding, the world pressing in as if gravity itself had thickened. Behind her, Callahan faded into the side street. Claire didn't look back. The snow outside blanketed the coastal town in silence, a kind of hush only winter knew how to keep. Claire sat at the window of a modest clapboard cottage near Kennebunkport, Maine, her hands gently cradling the infant swaddled in her arms. The baby stirred, one hand peeking from the fold's eyes still shut, mouth pursing in search of warmth. A kettle hissed softly in the kitchen. On the table beside her sat a government-issued cell phone. No one had called. No one needed to. The work was done. Brett Callahan's contact at the Office of Military Ethics had not only accepted the evidence, but moved with surgical precision, initiating a full internal review. Subpoenas were issued under seal, depositions taken in secret. When the headlines finally broke, they came like controlled detonations. Strategic leaks naming figures long suspected but never touched. Eddings, Kent, and Morris were quietly suspended, then indicted under multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of federal funds. Galcom and Argon Tactics were barred from future contracts pending further investigation. Claire watched it all unfold from a safe distance, never quoted, never pictured, but always present, behind the data, behind the ripple. The Justice Department never publicly named her, but those inside the program knew the truth. She wasn't just a cooperating witness. She was the axis around which the entire investigation turned. Maria had been the one to make the call. She remembered the way Claire's voice trembled when they offered protection. Not as a suspect, but as an asset. "You were right," Maria had said quietly, her voice soft through the line. "About all of it. And I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. Claire didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. For years her name had been a shadow cast by mistrust. Now, it held light again. They relocated her 3 weeks later, a federal escort driving through the night, weaving through empty highways until the coastline came into view. The house had been chosen for its anonymity. No curious neighbors, no foot traffic, no records linking it to her former life. Inside, it smelled of cedar and paint, a place to begin again. She had asked for 2 things: that she be allowed to give birth somewhere quiet, and that her son's name be left off all public registries for now. They agreed. When the labor came early, it arrived under snow. A local midwife delivered him in the small bedroom overlooking the bay. Claire had labored for 12 hours, sweat streaking down her back, lips bitten blood, but when the cry filled the room, sharp and defiant, she had laughed through the tears. She named him Scout, not because of the military dogs that once stalked her memory, not because it sounded brave or clever, but because of something she had once written in a letter to herself during the darkest days of the investigation. Scout was that reminder of instinct, of courage without certainty, of moving forward when everything told you to turn back. Now, in the quiet hours of early morning, she watched him sleep, his breath soft and rhythmic, his future unwritten but free. The kettle clicked off. Claire rose carefully, placing Scout in the hand-carved cradle by the fireplace. Outside, the wind curled along the eaves. Somewhere, far away, a judge was reviewing documents Claire had risked her life to protect. Somewhere else, a young compliance officer would stumble across her testimony, buried in classified addendums, and find the courage to ask the next question. That was how change began, not with fanfare or breaking news, but with someone refusing to look away. She didn't need the world to remember her name. She just needed Scout to know that his mother had walked through fire, not to burn bridges, but to light a path. If this story moved you, take a second to like the post and subscribe to follow more powerful true-to-life narratives. I'm curious, what moment hit you the hardest? Was there a scene that stayed with you? And where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one.